The room glittered with money, and that was the first lie. Chandeliers threw soft gold across silk dresses and tailored suits, and everyone inside believed that light meant virtue. Brenda Hayes stepped into it quietly, a black woman in a $40 sweater, flats scuffed just enough to tell the truth about how often she walked instead of being driven. She felt the shift before anyone spoke, the subtle tightening of air that comes when people decide, all at once, who you are allowed to be. She had felt it her whole life. Tonight, she let it happen. She crossed the ballroom slowly, eyes forward, posture calm, every step measured. She didn't scan for cameras or allies. She watched faces. Who smiled easily? Who smiled only when someone important approached? Who didn't smile at all? At the center of the room stood Bradley Thornton, white, silver-haired, confident in the way only men who've never been questioned can be. He laughed loudly, holding court, basking in the certainty that this was his world and everyone else was merely passing through. Brenda waited for a pause, then stepped forward and extended her hand. "Mr. Thornton," she said, voice clear, respectful. "I'm Brenda Hayes. I'd love to discuss." He didn't take her hand. He stepped back as if she'd reached for him with something contagious. The rejection was instant, public, theatrical. "I don't shake hands with the help," he said, loud enough to travel. The words bounced off marble and glass, echoing just long enough to make sure everyone heard them. A ripple went through the crowd. Not outrage, interest. Bradley turned slightly, enjoying it now. "Security," he called. "Who let this black woman in here?" His laugh was sharp, pleased with itself. "This is an investor gala, not a soup kitchen." Someone laughed with him. Someone else raised a phone. No one said stop. Brenda's hand hung in the air for half a second longer than necessary. Then she lowered it, her face unreadable. Bradley gestured at her sweater, his smile widening. "Look at her clothes. People like her sneak in, pretend they belong, then cry racism when we throw them out." The phrase "people like her" landed harder than the rest. Brenda felt the familiar burn rise in her chest, the instinct to shrink, to disappear, to make this end quickly. She didn't. She stood still, letting the humiliation finish its performance. 2 security guards moved in, big men. Blank faces. "Mum, you need to come with us." Brenda nodded once. She didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't raise her voice. As they guided her toward the exit, she caught Bradley's eye. He was already turning away, satisfied, the moment filed underhandled. That was when she smiled. Not wide, not defiant, just enough, a small, knowing curve that didn't belong in the story he thought he was telling. They walked her through the lobby and out into the night. The doors closed behind her, cutting off the music. The laughter, the lie. Cold air hit her face. She stood there for a moment, alone on the sidewalk, listening to the muffled sound of celebration continuing without her. She checked her watch, her mother's old Timex. 10:45 p.m. She exhaled slowly, pulled out her phone, and dialed home. "He refused to shake my hand," she said when her husband answered. It was worse than that. There was a pause. "Are you okay?" "I will be," she said. Tomorrow morning, 6 hours earlier, Brenda had been sitting in her corner office on the 42nd floor. Baltimore spread beneath her like a map she'd learned to read by heart. Sunlight cut across a desk polished smooth by years of work. The walls told a story no one at the gala would have guessed. Degrees framed neatly. Howard Wharton. Photos that captured moments of quiet power, not spectacle. A Forbes cover most people skimmed past. The quiet billionaire. That name had made her laugh when she first read it. Quiet was safer. Cassie Mills sat across from her, scrolling through documents. "The acquisition closes tomorrow at 9, Cassie said. "Once the filing goes through, we own 55.2%. Full control." Brenda nodded. "Good." Cassie hesitated. "You're really going to the gala like this?" "Like what?" "Alone. No announcement." Brenda stood and went to the window. "I want to see who he is," she said. "Not the version for cameras. The version he shows when he thinks he's untouchable." That was why she'd chosen the sweater. Why she'd left the jewelry behind. Why she'd taken an Uber instead of a car with a driver. It wasn't disguise. It was clarity. People revealed themselves when they thought you didn't matter. Bradley Thornton had revealed himself perfectly. Back in her hotel room, Brenda set her phone down and sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence settle. She didn't cry. She felt something steadier than anger, something colder. She opened her laptop and reviewed the final documents again. Signatures ready, timing precise. She had been planning this for 3 years. watching Thornton Ridley Technologies bleed value under leadership that confused arrogance with strength. Toxic cultures were expensive, so were secrets. Tomorrow both would come due. Across town in a bathroom lit too brightly, a young intern named Devon Price stared at his phone with shaking hands. He had recorded everything. 4 minutes of cruelty, clean and undeniable. He replayed the clip once more, listening to Bradley's voice, watching Brenda's face as security took her away. He thought of his mother, tired after double shifts, stories swallowed, because rent didn't wait for justice. He saved the video to the cloud. Then again, he didn't post it, not yet. At 9 the next morning, Brenda signed her name with calm precision. The transfer went through. The numbers changed. Control shifted. She closed the folder, smoothed the sweater, and walked into the building she now owned. Bradley Thornton walked into his office 15 minutes later, coffee in hand, smiling at a day he believed would be like any other. His assistant stopped him, pale. Emergency board meeting. Now. He laughed. About what? There's been an acquisition, she said. Majority. He laughed again, louder, until he pushed open the boardroom doors. Every seat was filled. The room was silent. At the head of the table in his chair sat the woman he had refused to touch. Brenda Hayes looked up serene. Good morning, Mr. Thornton, she said. We met last night. His smile collapsed. The floor seemed to tilt. Brenda placed a folder on the table. As of 9 a.m., I own 5.2% of this company. She folded her hands. We have a lot to discuss. And somewhere in the building, Devon's finger hovered over a button that could make the truth impossible to ignore. Bradley's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, as if his body were searching for words his mind could no longer supply. Around the table, the board members avoided his eyes, staring instead at the folder Brenda had placed before them like it might explode. The silence pressed down hard, the kind that makes every breath feel loud. Brenda let it stretch. Power didn't need to rush. Power waited. This is some kind of stunt, Bradley finally said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to him. You show up dressed like a nobody, provoke a reaction, then claim you own the company. I'll have legal tear this apart by lunch. Brenda nodded once, as if he'd just confirmed something she already knew. Your legal team has already seen the filing, she said calmly. They confirmed it 10 minutes ago. The structure was designed specifically to avoid the defenses you're thinking of. You taught me that, actually. Your 2019 white paper on hostile proof share classes was very helpful. A few heads lifted at that. Bradley's laugh died completely. Richard Sims cleared his throat, voice tight. It's real, Bradley. We verified it before you arrived. Bradley turned on him sharply. You verified it without telling me. Richard didn't flinch. I verified it because I'm the CFO. It's my job to know when the company no longer belongs to you. That landed harder than anything Brenda had said. Bradley's knuckles went white against the back of a chair. Brenda leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. I want to be very clear, she said. I didn't come here for revenge. If I wanted revenge, I would have shorted the stock, leaked everything anonymously, and watched this place burn from a distance. I came here for control. She looked around the table. And accountability. She tapped the folder, which brings us to why we're really here. The first screen flickered on. A timeline appeared. Dates, dollar amounts. Names redacted at first, then revealed. Settlement after settlement. Complaints marked handled internally. Brenda spoke without raising her voice. 19 formal complaints over 15 years. Racial discrimination. Gender discrimination. Retaliation, harassment. The words fell like weights. $4.2 million paid to make those complaints disappear. None disclosed to shareholders. None disclosed to this board. Margaret Davis whispered, I had no idea, but no one responded. Brenda advanced the slide. Emails appeared. Bradley's name in bold. Phrases like stop documenting and minimize exposure highlighted in yellow. Brenda didn't look at him as she spoke. This is not aggressive management. This is a pattern. She turned at last, meeting his eyes. And patterns are predictable. Bradley pushed his chair back abruptly. You think you're some hero, he snapped. You humiliated me. You set me up. Brenda stood, slowly. The room seemed to shrink around her. No, she said. I stood where you put me and let you speak. That's not a setup. That's a mirror. She took one step closer. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't ask why I was there. You decided. She paused. That's the problem. The board chairman cleared his throat. We need to discuss next steps. Brenda nodded. Yes, we do. She turned back to the table. Effective immediately. I'm calling for an independent investigation into executive conduct, full cooperation with regulators, and a review of every NDA related to discrimination claims. She let that settle. And I'm calling a vote. Bradley laughed again, this time sharp with panic. You think they'll go along with this? You think they'll let you tear down everything we built? Brenda didn't answer. She didn't need to. She sat down and folded her hands, eyes steady on the chairman. The vote began one by one. Voices said the word Bradley had never heard aimed at him before. Yes, in favor. Yes. Each one felt like a door closing. When it reached Rachel, his wife, the room went still again. She stood, her face pale but resolute. I vote yes, she said. Bradley stared at her like he'd been struck. Rachel. She cut him off with a small shake of her head. I can't protect you from yourself anymore. The chairman spoke last. The motion passes. Bradley sank into his chair as if gravity had suddenly increased. Brenda stood. Mr. Thornton, she said, voice even. You're relieved of your duties as CEO, effective immediately. She paused. Security will escort you out. He looked around wildly. You can't do this, he said, almost pleading now. I built this company. Brenda met his gaze. You built profits, she said. Other people built value. You confused the two. As security approached, Bradley's eyes landed on Brenda's hand. The one he hadn't shaken. He hesitated, then reached for it, desperation naked on his face. Brenda looked at the hand for a moment, then stepped back. No, she said softly. Now you understand how that feels. When the doors closed behind him, the room exhaled. Brenda turned back to the board. We have work to do, she said. This company survives if it tells the truth. She glanced at the journalists in the corner. All of it. Outside, Devon's phone buzzed nonstop. He watched the boardroom doors open and Bradley emerge, escorted, diminished. Devon didn't hesitate this time. He pressed post. The video spread like wildfire, but now it had context. Now it had an ending people didn't expect. Overnight, the narrative shifted from scandal to reckoning. Brenda watched it unfold from her hotel room, the sweater folded neatly on the chair. Cassie called, voice buzzing with disbelief. It's everywhere, she said. They're calling it the fastest karma in corporate history. Brenda closed her eyes briefly. It's not karma, she said. It's consequence. By morning, emails poured in, former employees, anonymous at first, then bolder, stories they'd been too afraid to tell. Brenda read every one. She felt the weight of them settle on her shoulders, heavy but grounding. This wasn't about one insult at a gala. It never had been. It was about systems that only changed when someone with power decided to pull instead of push. She dressed again, this time in a tailored black suit, the watch still on her wrist. As she walked back into the building, employees watched her with a mix of fear and hope. She stopped when a young woman near the elevators dropped a folder, papers scattering. Brenda bent to help her pick them up. Thank you, the woman whispered, eyes wide. Brenda smiled gently. You belong here, she said, and meant it. And somewhere, in a quiet apartment, 19 people watched the news with tears in their eyes, wondering if this time, finally, the door that had been slammed in their faces might actually open. The morning after the board vote didn't feel like victory. It felt like pressure. Brenda woke before sunrise, not to celebration, but to the weight of knowing that power, once claimed, demanded constant proof. From her hotel window the city looked unchanged, traffic flowing, people heading to jobs where most of them would never know her name. But her phone told a different story. Messages stacked by the dozens. Employees asking if they were safe. Investors asking if the company would survive. Journalists asking for comments she still refused to give. Silence had carried her this far. Now silence felt like risk. By 8 a.m. she was back inside TRT headquarters. The lobby buzzed with low, nervous energy. People whispered. Heads turned. Some faces showed hope. Others showed resentment sharpened by fear. Brenda moved through it without slowing, her heels clicking with measured rhythm, not rushing, not hesitating. Authority didn't announce itself. It occupied space. In the executive suite, Cassie was already waiting. Dark circles under her eyes from a night of nonstop calls. We have a problem, Cassie said without preamble. Brenda set her bag down. Of course we do. Tell me. Cassie slid a tablet across the desk. An internal memo glowed on the screen, leaked anonymously to a financial blog just minutes earlier. Interim leadership uncertainty may destabilize long-term growth. Market confidence fragile. Translation: someone inside the company was trying to scare investors. Brenda exhaled slowly. Bradley's people, she said. Cassie nodded. Loyalists, or opportunists. Hard to tell the difference right now. Brenda straightened. Then we make it very clear who's in charge. She called an all-hands meeting for noon. No script, no PR team, no talking points. When the time came, the auditorium filled beyond capacity. Employees lined the walls, stood in aisles, spilled into the hallway. Some had watched the gala video a dozen times. Some had lived versions of it quietly for years. Brenda walked onto the stage alone. No music, no introduction. Just a woman and a microphone. "I know you're scared," she began. Voice steady, unforced. "Change always feels like danger when you've been told stability matters more than dignity." The room went still. "I'm not here to burn this company down. I'm here to rebuild what was never allowed to stand upright." She paused. "Some of you were hurt here. Some of you were silenced. Some of you learned to keep your heads down because speaking up cost too much." She looked across the sea of faces. "That ends now." A hand rose near the front. A man in his 40s, jaw tight. "What happens to the complaints?" he asked. "The ones that disappeared?" Brenda nodded once. "They come back. All of them. Every NDA tied to discrimination or retaliation will be reviewed. Those people will be contacted. They will be heard." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Another voice, shaking. "And the people who covered it up?" Brenda didn't hesitate. "They don't stay." After the meeting, she returned to her office to find a letter waiting on her desk. No sender name. Just an envelope thick, heavy with intention. Inside were copies of emails, handwritten notes, calendar invites marked private. Evidence she hadn't seen yet. The rot went deeper. Cassie watched her red, anger hardening her expression. "This is war," Cassie said. Brenda folded the papers carefully. "No," she replied. "This is surgery, and it's going to hurt." By afternoon, Bradley's influence made its next move. A lawsuit was filed. Wrongful termination, defamation, hostile takeover, misconduct. The headlines tried to blur the truth into noise. Brenda's phone rang. "Jerome this time. He's panicking," he said quietly. "Men like him always do when the ground shifts." Brenda closed her eyes. "He still thinks this is about him." Jerome paused. "Isn't it?" Brenda looked out at the city again. Not anymore. The first former employee came forward publicly that evening. Then another. Then another. Faces, names, stories that matched the documents almost word for word. The pattern became impossible to deny. Markets reacted, not with fear but with cautious optimism. Accountability, it turned out, was good for business. TR stock steadied, then climbed, but the danger wasn't gone. Brenda knew that. Power challenge never surrendered quietly, and somewhere, in a house that suddenly felt too large, Bradley Thornton was planning his next move, convinced that this wasn't the end, only the beginning of something far uglier. Bradley didn't sleep. He paced the length of his study as dawn crept through the tall windows, the walls lined with awards that now felt like accusations. Every plaque read his name. Every framed headline praised a man the world no longer believed in. He replayed the boardroom vote over and over, the sound of favor landing like nails in a coffin. Worst of all wasn't Brenda's calm voice or Rachel's final vote. It was the way no one rushed to defend him. Power, once assumed permanent, had evaporated overnight. By mid-morning, his lawyers arrived with grim faces and tighter voices. The lawsuit they'd filed was weak, they admitted, more pressure tactic than strategy. The documents Brenda possessed were devastating. Federal investigators had already requested preliminary interviews. "We need leverage," Bradley snapped. "Something that makes her hesitate." The lead attorney hesitated himself. "There may be a way," he said carefully. "Her acquisition structure, offshore entities, complex layering, perfectly legal, but complicated enough to question publicly." Bradley's eyes lit up. "So we attack her credibility, make her look corrupt." The attorney nodded slowly. "It would be risky." Bradley laughed, sharp and humorless. "So is doing nothing." The article dropped that afternoon. Anonymous sources questioned Hayes Capital's transparency, hinted at foreign money, suggested backroom deals. The language was careful, insinuating without accusing, but the intent was clear. Brenda read it on her tablet while riding the elevator, expression unreadable. Cassie exploded the moment she saw it. "This is retaliation. They're trying to poison the well." Brenda nodded. "I expected this." She stepped out onto the executive floor. "They don't understand yet." Cassie frowned. "Understand what?" Brenda met her eyes. "That I don't bluff." She called an emergency press conference for the following morning. The first time she would speak publicly. Cameras packed the room before sunrise. Commentators speculated wildly. Some expected denial, others a lawsuit. Brenda walked to the podium alone, no notes, no teleprompter. Yesterday, questions were raised about my firm's integrity. She began. So today, I'm releasing everything. Gasps rippled through the room. Every acquisition structure, every investor, every dollar traced and audited by 3 independent firms. She paused. Transparency shouldn't be reactive. It should be standard. Reporters fired questions, rapid and aggressive. She answered calmly. Then she shifted. While we're discussing transparency, she said, I'd like to address something else. Screens behind her lit up. Internal TRT emails, settlement spreadsheets, diversity misrepresentation charts. The same evidence, now public, now undeniable. These documents will be submitted to regulators this morning, Brenda said, along with my formal request that all past victims be released from silence. The room erupted. By noon, Bradley's legal team was in freefall. Their phones rang nonstop. The narrative had flipped completely. The attack on Brenda collapsed under the weight of her openness. Markets surged. Investors praised her decisiveness. TRT stock jumped 5% in a single afternoon. Bradley watched it all from his study, fists clenched, realizing too late that he'd chosen the wrong battlefield. That night, Rachel returned home to pack the last of her things. Bradley sat at the kitchen table hollow-eyed. You planned this, he said weakly. She didn't look up. No, she replied. You did. She just stopped pretending it was fine. She closed her suitcase. This is where I get off. As the door shut behind her, Bradley was left alone with the truth he'd spent decades avoiding. And across the city, Brenda stood in her office, watching the skyline glow, knowing the hardest part still lay ahead. Power had been taken. Now it had to be used. The federal inquiry moved faster than anyone expected. Subpoenas followed press releases. Interviews followed subpoenas. What had once been whispers inside HR files became sworn testimony under penalty of perjury. Former employees sat in plain government offices and told stories they had been forced to swallow for years. Their voices shook at first. Then they steadied. Speaking the truth felt dangerous but also relieving, like finally breathing after being underwater too long. Brenda watched none of it from a distance. She showed up, quietly. Not to dominate the room, not to perform righteousness, but to listen. When one former engineer broke down mid-sentence, hands trembling as he described being told he was lucky to even be allowed in the building, Brenda didn't interrupt. She didn't comfort him with words. She just stayed. Presence mattered more than speeches. Inside TRT, the cultural shift was immediate and unsettling. Managers who had thrived under Bradley's reign of fear suddenly found themselves exposed. Meetings changed. People spoke up. Others stayed silent, uncertain whether this openness was real or temporary. Brenda knew trust couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned slowly, painfully, one decision at a time. Not everyone welcomed the change. Anonymous emails flooded HR. Accusations of reverse discrimination. Claims that standards were being lowered. Brenda read every single message. She answered none of them publicly. Instead, she changed systems. Transparent promotion criteria, independent oversight, mandatory reporting that went outside the company if internal review failed. The kind of safeguards that removed excuses as effectively as they removed power. Bradley's world shrank by the day. Friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. His name became shorthand in media for a certain type of executive behavior, the kind boards now scrambled to distance themselves from. He tried once more to regain control, leaking selective documents, framing himself as a victim of a political agenda. The attempt backfired spectacularly. Investigators added obstruction to their growing list of concerns. One evening, a message appeared in Brenda's inbox marked urgent. It was from Bradley himself. No lawyers copied. No assistants. Just a single line, "We need to talk." Brenda stared at the screen for a long moment. Cassie noticed. "You don't owe him anything," she said. Brenda nodded. "I know." She typed a response anyway. "Tomorrow, 1 hour, my office." Bradley arrived early. Thinner than she remembered, suit hanging looser on his frame. The confidence was gone. In its place sat something raw and unfamiliar. Fear. He stood as she entered. Old instincts. She didn't offer her hand. She sat. "Say what you came to say," she told him. He swallowed. "I didn't know," he began. Brenda raised a finger. "Stop. That sentence is a lie you've told yourself for years." His jaw tightened. "I built this company," he insisted weakly. "I made tough calls." Brenda leaned forward. "You made cruel ones, and you hid behind success to excuse them." Silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. "I'm finished," he said finally. It wasn't a threat. It was a realization. They're going to take everything. Brenda's voice softened, but only slightly. "No," she said. "They're going to take what you should never have been allowed to keep." He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time without filters or assumptions. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Brenda stood. "Nothing," she replied. "This was never about revenge." She opened the door. "It's about repair. And you're not part of that process anymore." Bradley left without another word. As the door closed, Brenda exhaled slowly. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent and alive. Inside, the work continued. And though the storm was beginning to break, its final reckoning had not yet arrived. The charges came down quietly without spectacle. No dramatic arrests, no flashing lights, just documents, signatures, and a press release that used careful language to describe years of misconduct, discrimination, securities fraud, obstruction. Bradley Thornton's name appeared in black ink on white paper, stripped of titles, stripped of deference. The man who once commanded rooms now existed only in legal paragraphs and past tense. TRT didn't celebrate. Brenda didn't allow it. Justice isn't entertainment, she reminded her team. It's responsibility. The company entered a consent decree. External oversight, mandatory reforms, painful audits. Shareholders grumbled at first, but the numbers told a different story. Productivity rose. Turnover dropped. Innovation accelerated when fear no longer choked the room. Talent, it turned out, thrived when it wasn't constantly defending itself. One afternoon, Brenda received a handwritten letter. Not from a lawyer, not from an executive, from Sarah Johnson, the former marketing manager whose complaint had been buried years ago. "Thank you for letting me speak without being punished for it. I start my new job next month. I finally feel like myself again." Brenda read it twice, then placed it in her desk drawer. These were the victories that mattered. Quiet, human, real. The board offered Brenda the permanent CEO role. Unanimous vote, generous package. Headlines ready to roll. She declined the spectacle again. "Titles don't fix cultures," she said. "Systems do." She accepted the role without ceremony, without interviews, without a victory lap. Some called it humility. Others called it control. Brenda didn't care what they called it. Months passed. The frenzy faded. Another scandal replaced this one in the news cycle. But inside TRT, something fundamental had shifted. A young engineer challenged a senior director in a meeting and wasn't punished. A black woman led a product launch without being asked if she was ready. A complaint was filed and investigated transparently, without retaliation. These weren't miracles. They were choices repeated daily. On the anniversary of the gala, Brenda returned to the Grand Monarch Hotel. Not for an event, just dinner. The same ballroom, quieter now. The same chandeliers, less blinding. She wore the same cream sweater. A server approached nervous. Brenda smiled. "You're doing great," she said. The server relaxed instantly. Small moments carried weight when you understood them. Outside, waiting for her car, Brenda checked her watch. The old Timex still ticked steadily. Her mother's voice echoed in memory. "You can judge a person by how they treat people they think have no power." Brenda looked back at the hotel doors, then forward into the night. Power had tried to humiliate her. She had answered with patience. It had tried to silence her. She had answered with structure. It had tried to destroy her credibility. She had answered with truth. In the end, there was no shouting, no revenge, no spectacle. Just consequences. And somewhere, in a smaller house with fewer lights, Bradley Thornton watched the world move on without him, finally understanding too late that respect, once refused, is rarely offered again.